Thank you. Good morning. Today is Friday, September the 15th, 2023. This is a regularly scheduled meeting of the Policy Committee for the Darien Board of Education. The next policy meeting is to be this morning. We have a few agenda items. We have a social media policy, policy number 4400. We have a program for instructional curriculum, textbooks, and other instructional materials, policy number 6210. And we have a policy 8220, challenges to instructional material. These have been discussed at length by this committee, as well as a discussion by the full Board of Education. We also have a new discussion on here regarding an advertising and naming rights policy. As I mentioned, we've discussed most of these policies at length at both this committee and at the board level. And for each of these three policies, we have two competing versions, one that's been drafted by outside counsel, one that's been drafted by policy committee members. I think in the interest of time, given the robust discussion that's already occurred, what I think would be best to do would be to take a poll and see if there's any interest in taking action by the current policy committee members on each of these particular items, and then perhaps moving through to see if there's interest in making motions to approve either version. So with that thought in mind, if there's not any other opinion as to how to proceed, I would see if there was a motion to proceed with 4400, the version that was drafted by myself and a former policy committee member.
So that's news to me. It was my understanding that it was only you that drafted that. Was Ms. Worm involved in drafting those policies as well?
So is there any interest in proceeding with that?
Can you please answer my question?
You might want to keep up with your email, Sarah. I mean,
Okay.
yes, the answer is yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I am in favor of moving forward with Shippen and Goodwin's version of 4400.
So I would ask for that motion in a moment. Is there any motion on moving
We don't
forward
make
this?
motions as committees. It's a consensus that we move to the full board.
So there's no interest.
There's absolutely interest for me to move Shippen and Goodwin's version.
But no,
the
to
full
answer your question, I'm not interested
Okay,
in
so the
moving
answer is no
forward
there.
on the
Is
policy.
the answer yes or no?
The motion you've drafted, your draft?
That's correct.
Yes, I do not want, I would like Shippen and Goodwin's version, not yours.
So yes, you want to move.
Question.
So is it yes, you want to move ahead, or no, you don't want to move ahead with that? I'm sorry. I'm
Not
just
with
giving-
yours.
Thank you. That was the answer I was looking for. So the answer is no. So we have two no's, one yes. So that motion for consensus will fail. We have 4400 drafted by Shipman and Goodwin. Is there interest in moving ahead and trying to adopt that as a policy committee meeting?
Yes, I have a couple questions about it.
Okay.
I agree.
Okay, fine. We'll move forward with that. Questions?
So I have a question. We talked about, sorry, yeah,
I just want to recognize
oh, sorry.
that we have Jessica Richmond Smith here from Shippen and Goodwin. Jessica was here originally at our request to talk through Mr. Brown's version. If the board would like to go through that and hear Attorney Smith's comments on that, and or to comment on the version that we previously presented here administratively.
I think that would be a helpful exercise myself. I think there's been a lot of discussion about the process moving forward, and it's been suggested several times that what was asked for was just a couple easy, quick questions to check with Shippen and Goodwin on, and what I saw didn't look to me like it was an easy lift. It looked like it took quite a bit of work, and I'd like to understand a little bit what kind of work went into that.
Is that okay? Or I just want to recognize who's sitting at the table, obviously, and the purpose.
No, I'm not sure why we're talking about the prior version, because we've already decided there's no interest in that. So if we would like, I believe the question was regarding the version presented by Shipman and Goodwin. That would make sense to me to look at.
Okay, if that's the committee's choice, that's fine.
That's the chair's choice, not the committee's choice, I guess is what.
Oh, sorry, I thought Mr. Brown said he would like to look at the one presented by Shippen and
I think
Goodwin.
you all decided not to move forward with the discussion on Mr. Brown's version.
Right.
or the
Right.
version that was
Right.
presented by the board members, so let's move forward
Right.
with Shippen and Goodwin version.
Yep.
And understand questions and thoughts around that.
Okay.
Will do.
These are my two questions have been raised previously, and I just want to see if we can get some sort of closure on them before moving to the full board. I'm looking on page 5 of Shipman's policy. The second bullet point down, it's about employee must set up the club, et cetera, as a group list, which will be closed. And we've had some discussion about whether some of these accounts should be open, available to the public, whether it's, you know, an elementary school parent wanting to look at a high school account, or somebody moving to town wants to look at what a specific elementary school, you know, music teacher is doing, you know, that kind of stuff. Is there language to put in there? I don't know. I just would love your thoughts about, excuse me, some of these accounts being open versus closed.
Sure. So I think that the concern is if the account is completely open, it might lead to student privacy concerns.
Okay.
Because these accounts, I assume, are being used to communicate about student information, student activities, and there are FERPA concerns, and there are also more general concerns about the public having access to that.
Okay.
That being said, I'm sure we can figure out a way technologically to make it so that certain portions of the sites are open. Informational portions, for example, that don't include student information or anything about students in particular.
Okay. So do you think that it's, the language in here is fine, saying, you know, if there is some pieces open, is it, should that be?
I think we should specify exactly the extent to which the site would be open, just so that if you do have a portion of it, it's open, you wouldn't be considered to have violated your policy, and I'm happy to suggest language.
Okay, I think that would be helpful before we go for the full board. My other question was, and it was mentioned in the memo that March wrote about codifying the accounts should be DPS accounts and how we're going to name those. So would love some language around that included.
Sure.
Those are my two.
Those are my two as well. Other than that, I'm fine with this draft of the policy as it works, as it, excuse me, as it is written right now.
So is there a consensus on moving this forward to the full board?
Yes, please.
I would recommend we move it forward to the full board.
All right, so that I am counting 2 out of 3, so that motion will pass. Next, we have 6210 program instruction materials. Again, same situation. We have 2 competing versions, one drafted by policy committee members, mostly myself, and one drafted by Shipman Goodwin. Anybody have any interest in reviewing, moving forward, or looking at the one drafted by the policy committee? Seeing none, I will ask if anyone's interested in looking at 6210 as drafted by Shipman Goodwin and perhaps adopting such policy. I'm seeing some nods and giggles. Is that a yes?
I'm just, once again, I'm reacting to the characterization that there was a draft written by the policy committee. I did not participate in drafting that version of the policy.
I will
So
echo that.
that was not
I said members,
drafted by
but
the committee.
members, but that's
Yeah,
fine. I
that too, but
appreciate the
that's fine.
distinction. You're correct in that. So is there any interest in moving forward with 6210 as drafted by Shipman Goodman?
Yes, I'm
Yes,
interested
there
in
is.
moving forward.
Yes, I am. And
All right.
again, I think there's a question about,
So I'm seeing 2 out of 3. So I think that's going to move ahead. If there's questions, I think we should open the discussion.
thank you.
Of course.
So my questions are about the committee, the group that would, no, this is the wrong policy. Sorry, I'm thinking about 6220. This is 6210. There was a thought, conversation earlier about adding a transparency language into this policy. We have policy 6930. I'm wondering if 6930, which is the parental access to instructional material, covers that transparency, or if there is it need, there, you know, other board members outside of this committee have expressed that maybe having transparency in this policy is worthwhile. I'm questioning whether 6930 covers us, and I don't know if that's a question for March, for Jessica.
And if I can jump in, I think, yeah, Jessica, I don't think you all have reviewed this yet based on our conversations, but I guess my question is, as a best practice, would we embed a policy that exists elsewhere into another policy? 6930 is a policy we reviewed and brought to the board and approved in February of this same year. So I don't, it would seem to me that it's current and relevant and applicable. So I would not add something more to this myself, but if you think as a best practice, it's worth doing, I'm interested in hearing that.
So are you asking whether to do away with 6930 and instead subsume it within the curriculum policy, or?
I don't even think we've gotten there yet because it was being brought up separate from any discussion of 6930. I think
Okay.
there was a desire to add language into this policy about transparency. And
I see.
I guess we're suggesting that 6930, because all of these work together, already provides
I
the
see.
transparency explanation that we need.
Okay, so I think that legally, it doesn't matter. I think the question is whether for optics reasons, it's important for you to signal in your curriculum policy that parents do have access under federal law and now under state law. There was actually a change in this last legislative session, basically codifying the federal law requiring parents to have access to curricular materials into state law, just FYI. So you should absolutely keep 6930, and we're going to make a slight change to that. But the question is whether to cross-reference it. You can do that either by incorporating language. I wouldn't necessarily repeat the entire policy in the curriculum policy, but in the legal references section, you could also cross-reference 6930 and the
Okay.
PPRA,
Okay.
which is the Pupil Protection Privacy.
Right.
Act.
Great sign. Thank
That
you.
makes sense. So I
Yeah.
think that makes sense to me. I don't know. Dave and Julie, does that make sense?
Would you like to reference the transparency policy?
No, I don't actually have an opinion on that. So I guess the question, is there further discussion or questions, or would we like to move ahead perhaps with a proposition to include a cross-reference?
I think it's just a general, a broader conversation at the board. I think we get a sense of the board if they feel like we need to include more specific transparency language or the reference or.
So then should we recommend perhaps moving this up to the entire board with that discussion?
Yes, please.
I
All right.
agree.
So I see 2 out of 3, so that will move ahead. Next, we have 6220 challenges, to instructional materials. Same question there. We have 2 different policies, 2 competing ones, one drafted by board chair, policy chair, and one drafted by Shipman and Goodwin. Is there interest in having discussion of the version drafted by myself? Seeing none, is there any discussion in any interest in discussing the Shipman and Goodwin policy?
So yes, I would be interested in discussing.
So
the
that's
ship-
1 yes.
I'm
Yes,
sorry.
please.
2 yes. Okay, 2 out of 3. Let's proceed.
I continue to support this as drafted, as I have since I believe November. I still am not on board with having 3 parents as part of the review committee. So with a revision there, I could be ready to take this policy forward.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I don't necessarily as a concept have an issue with having parents on the committee, but I don't know how logistically, pragmatically, how you don't end up potentially pitting parents against parents, or, how do you choose those 3? I think it's a very tricky quagmire that I'm not sure we want to get involved in.
I appreciate the idea of being inclusive, but I agree. We're picking 3 people at random or not at random. Either way has complications, and they are coming to the table with their opinions and most likely not expertise in this area. And it's one neighbor against another neighbor or not. I don't see that it adds enough to be worth what it risks.
I think that good conversation as always. I think in terms of looking at this stuff, sorry. I think this should just be bumped up and have a broader conversation with the board as to what the composition of that process looks like. Because I do think we have to make sure everyone understands what process we're going to go through to put anyone on some review board, whether it's strictly, people from the district staff or whether we include parents. Let's just have a broader discussion at the board level.
So it is okay to move it. It is okay to move a policy if there's discussion or differences or other ways for clarification and further discussion with the board. It'd be so ways to do that.
And again, maybe Alan, it's I can't think I remember reading it, but maybe also from a board perspective, a refresh on anything that's out there from a district standpoint in terms of how this is done in other districts, who participates and how they go through the process of putting that type of review board or committee together.
We could, Mr. Chairman, we do have the attorney here, some reference for that might be helpful right now.
If Jessica's
That's
willing,
okay.
That's just fine.
Well, I have to be careful about talking about other clients, but I
Yeah.
will say generally, I'm aware of this process having just occurred in another district. And I think your point about appointing parents to the committee is well taken. I think it's challenging to decide which parents would be on the committee. I think there are other ways to do it. For example, this is just an example, you might decide that certain PTA presidents are the parents to be appointed. And the premise there being that they're already representative of a certain portion of the community. I have seen that leaving it to the superintendent's discretion can put a burden on the superintendent and can create rifts, but it's just something to think about. In terms of the process, was that the question, how it's done?
Yeah,
Or how it
what
plays
other
out.
districts have done. This is from Westport, right? This is pretty much what they have, no? Or
I took it from Westport. Dr. Adley and I made a couple of changes.
Okay.
But it's
based off of.
Because I hadn't really tried.
Gotcha.
And again, I want to be careful about speaking about specific other districts, but I know that it's worked well from what I could see. But again, the only thing I would point to is what you already have pointed to, which is how do you exercise the discretion with regard to appointing community members or parents?
Thanks.
I would just comment that I think back to Mr. Buckley's comment that he'd rather have, instead of 100 senators, the 100 random people out of the Boston phone book governing. And I think that having involvement of community members is very important, and that not having that input, whether there be disputes or various points of view, I think losing that input and going to nameless, faceless experts is a mistake. However, it seems we are moving in that direction. So I would counter that and suggest maybe it is important to have outsiders be able to come in and have their opinions heard.
that's why I think it needs to be bumped up to the board.
Oh, agreed.
I think we get plenty of feedback from parents, whether it's at public meetings, whether it's the emails, whether they bump up the challenge to us. I think we have to balance that. We've got a group of professionals from an education standpoint to review these materials, but then it's about getting everyone comfortable with the process and then how the review process works and who's on that review process. So that's why I think it's just best. I think we've gotten good feedback here today. Let's just have a little broader conversation from the board perspective. Anyone has any additional questions around this, we can bump them up to you, Dave, or myself, and we'll wrangle with those before the next board meeting.
Couldn't agree more. I just wanted to comment and leave that marker there before this move forward
Thank you.
as part of the conversation. Any other comments or thoughts on this? All right, so it looks like we'll move this up to the entire board. So moving to agenda item 2, discussions on matters relating to the consideration of a new advertising and naming rights policy. Any comments, questions, thoughts?
Just context, the naming rights policy isn't really part of this discussion. The board agreed to separate it at the last meeting. So it's really not a part of this particular discussion at this particular point. So I think in the memo, there were some questions. This item is up for discussion coming forward at the future board meetings. And with discussions between Human Resources, Business Office, myself, we were looking to see if we can get a wee bit more guidance on some of the basic questions here, or maybe they're not so basic, just for direction as we actually go down this way. We have a couple of policies that will be available to us, but we just want to get a wee insight. And if that needs to go back to the board for the similar discussion, that's okay too. But I think that Marge had outlined these in the memorandum. If you can reference them, and perhaps we could reflect on them and just.
Yeah, so I think, sorry.
No, go ahead, Sarah, let's keep this.
So I think that the first thing we need to solve is, what is the objective? What are we looking to do? And if we are looking to reduce our budget, are we looking to add revenue, to add additional things to our budget? Are we looking to, just why are we doing this? I do think it's a fine idea. I'm not opposed to it. I just think we have to figure out kind of what we're doing and why we're doing it. I think to your point about staffing, who's going to go out and get these ads? Who's going to approve them? Who's going to, there's a lot of steps involved. that we need to think through. Is this going to be an added burden on Rich? Is this going to be an added burden on you? I mean, what costs are associated with that? I think it raises a lot of questions that need to be solved before we can put together a policy, I think.
So the.
Let's go to Julie.
Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you. Thanks. I'm going to back it up even a little bit more because this is really the first time we're getting into a conversation on this. So looking at the example policies was very helpful. Mr. Seedy had forwarded an article, which was also very helpful to understand some of what goes on in Wilton. I think there's some great information here for us to take forward and prepare a conversation for the larger board, because personally, I feel like there are some big picture questions that you sort of just tapped into a little bit, Sarah, that we need to address. What is the objective? But either at a bigger level, like if you look at the examples in our packet today, Richfield has our resources are meant for educational purposes only. They are not to be used for revenue generators, whereas Wilton has clearly made a very concerted effort to bring in revenue with advertising, et cetera. So we need to talk philosophically about how we want to move forward as a board. And from there, I think then we need to talk about what our objectives are a little bit. Are we trying to, or maybe that's not the right order, but these are things I think we need to discuss. Are we looking to increase revenue? If so, what are the levers we can pull? Advertising is one, but there are other things we probably should just have an open discussion about as well. Like I just did a quick search of other revenue sources for public school districts. Some schools have elementary aftercare programs that are fee-based, and that's an extra revenue source. I'm not trying to throw new projects in. I'm just saying to have kind of a universal discussion about what we're trying to do at a higher level. And then I agree, this sounds like a pretty available option to us with definitely some pieces to work out about who, how much, who would handle it, all of that good stuff. So that's there too.
I do feel like since Mr. Rudel is not here, that I have an obligation to say that his experience with advertising has been that the revenues have gone to the booster clubs. And that they've then purchased things for the district. I think that Jessica may need to do some research on how the mechanics, but he's particularly concerned if the revenues are coming to the district about who's going to go and solicit advertisements, because that I don't think he has the staff for that.
And there was interesting information as far as setting up a 501c3 so that advertisers are making a charitable donation, and it behooves them to want to add. I mean, there are interesting things to figure out. But I don't think we're at the draft of policy place just yet, I guess is where I'm going.
I guess I'll throw my 2 cents. I looked at the 2 policy samples that were given. I thought that the Weston one, the standards that were in there were extremely vague from a policy level, very subjective. So I thought that would be difficult to adopt. I thought the Wilton one was a little tighter. Just as a general matter, and again, Rich isn't here, so I'm not sure who to address this, but really, I don't understand why we're considering this. I have no idea what the scope is dollar-wise. I don't understand what problem we're trying to solve deficit-wise. And honestly, I've gone up to some of the other fields and seen the advertising. I go to our fields that are clean and pristine and for us, and I kind of think it's not a bad flex in a way that we don't need your sign on the backfield wall. Like it's tacky. So as a personal matter, I just kind of like the way we do it now. And I'm not very interested in pursuing this, but look forward to learning more. And perhaps there's a giant financial opportunity that we should be capitalizing on that I don't yet understand, but it seems like this is going to the full board for further discussion.
So this was originally back in the budget process, referenced back to the policy committee as a revenue source, simply as that. And they asked us to take a look at that under that consideration. And would there be any consideration of bringing such a policy forward? That was the charge at the time.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, my one, I wasn't necessarily prepared to talk about this, but since I'm sitting here, you can get your money's worth. My one comment would be that I would suggest thinking hard about how you describe the advertisements that are permissible and not permissible, because it could become a free speech issue.
Okay. Do you have any guidance about, I think the incentive of having a 501c3, people being able to donate and then getting the write-off for that, I think that's an incentive for a lot of people to advertise. Is that if an organization were to donate to the Darien Public Schools, they can't do that, correct? Like they can,
If they were to donate,
like writing the check to Darien Public Schools. Do you then get the text letter? You do, right?
To hang a banner on the
Yes. Yeah.
stadium.
Okay, so we don't have to create a separate 501c3.
If it's a different organization. Right.
I can't answer that off the top of my head. That's something I need to look into. What I do know, and I think I saw this just quickly flipping through these policies, is it's very important not to tie the contribution or the money that's put in through advertising to any specific responsibility that would be put onto the school district. Which is probably obvious, but something to probably put in your policy if you have one.
So is
So
there
I
any,
think at the end of the day, if I may, Dave,
of course you may.
thank you. You've asked all the right questions, and that's the goal of the policy committee, all right? It wasn't about sitting here and drafting a policy, and we had good information in here. We started the conversation at the board level. You bring up some good points, Julie, about additional revenue. I think the problem with that is just continuously open this can of worms, so I think at the end of the day, if you collectively, from a committee standpoint, can organize all those questions to bring up to the board, and then we continue to have the conversation at the board level. I think, a lot of this has come, to various board members in terms of people wanting to donate, people wanting to use the scoreboard. A lot of it has, the other question is it just local businesses? Is it outside of the district, outside of the town, right? There are just people that have wanted to participate or see how they could help the district. A lot of infrastructure and a lot of dollars has been raised and donated. The other question is, you have to look at, if you're using scoreboards, it becomes very sports specific, right? But do the donations, are they sports specific? We've got an incredible theater program, incredible music, incredible art program. So those are the questions that we have to ask. There's one, Rich was telling me, one district advertising revenue goes to offset the cost of security for those specific events. That's clean, that's clear, that's logical, right? So those are the things that you have to think about. Yeah.
One more comment, because you mentioned sports and advertising for sports. Just keep in mind Title IX,
Yes.
because all the money that's flowing into your sports activities, if it's concentrated on, for example, the football fields, you have to take that into account as part of the overall funding to all the programs.
So I think, at the end of the day, just, organize the thoughts and the questions that came here. Thank you for the Marge and Rich and everyone that put together some other policies there and stuff like that. But
I have to pass along my notes and questions.
Yeah.
It got more nitty gritty than what I got into here.
yeah,
Sarah,
I think I'm good for the broader conversation.
thanks for wrapping that up, Duke. Appreciate it. All right, so I'm hearing this is going to go back with discussion and comments. So thank you everyone for your contributions. Any further questions, comments, Marge?
So I know we're not discussing naming, but as long as we have an attorney here, there was some initial concern from my point of view and Rich's about whether the school district has the right to name the buildings or fields because we don't own them. I don't know whether the town has an opinion or whether you'd like Jessica to do some research before we bring it back.
I mean, you teed it up and she's sitting here, so why?
Well, I don't know
why
whether
wouldn't you?
maybe the town has already given an opinion. That's what I wanted to check on.
I'm not, have you heard anything along those lines, Duke,
no.
or
I have not.
Alan? No? Okay, so I guess this will be first impression, just
You know,
to the
the-
school
I-
point of view.
Sorry.
Sorry, no, please.
Chief.
No, fine, I'm done.
I think, the only thing that we've done recently is accept, which I think was a nice overall thought process is, Jessica, we accepted to rename the Oval up at the high school. And we did go through the process of talking to the town, planning and zoning. We're not renaming the street, but we're adding it to the Oval up there with respect to something the students and the parents wanted to do. So, but I think it's a good point. I think that the takeaway, to me, we can continue the conversation, we could get some guidance from Jessica on the fact that we have care, control, and custody, but we don't have ownership. If there's a policy, the schools all have pretty much local community names associated with them. So I think that would be the guidance.
I'm trying to think,
You
is there
bring up a
anything else
good
in
point.
town that's named?
Say that
I'm
again?
trying, is there anything in town that's named? I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
No, and the only other thing that just pops into my head as we're having a conversation, and I don't remember, it did come to the board and we agreed to it, but Dr. Brenner came up with the name for Fitch Academy. Again, Fitch is a old school name associated with town, as it's Tokenie Holmes Royal.
So Jessica, if you have thoughts, again, I know you're doing this off
Yeah.
the top of your head. If you want to do research or anything, we'll caveat it, but please.
My thought is I should not speak on good research to support, but I'm also thinking if Dr. Brenner named Fitch Academy, we've probably recently advised you on that issue.
Well,
So-
Fitch is in a private office building.
Oh.
So that's.
So it's not owned by the town.
Yeah, but it's Lake Smart. It's just, I think we just did it kind of as a board.
Yeah.
So I did notice that in Wilton, this advertising program is being piloted by Board of Selectmen in concert with private individuals, but it is an outside organization that they have set up to take in these funds and use them to help maintain the fields. I looked into, because all the fields in Wilton appear to be named. One was named after a longtime football coach in memory of. Another was named after a soccer star who is still with us and runs a camp in Wilton each summer. And the other is a stadium that was built as a memorial to veterans. But it didn't get into any detail on how that process worked, but I don't know if there's information to be found there.
Yeah, I think the key that you already mentioned is whether it's town-owned property, and obviously you have control of the operation of your schools and your property, but we'll have to, I also recommend working with your town attorney to come to an agreement on what the answer is.
Thank you.
I'll have a takeaway of an initial conversation with the town and then circle back with them.
All right, great discussion. Anything else, or should we conclude that?
I'm good, thank
Can I
you.
just have a clarification? I just want
Please.
to make sure that for the advertising that will be taken back, essentially this discussion and the questions that were posed to this particular committee,
I'll send those
And you could-
to you.
and we'll take those back to the full board for discussion.
Yeah, I think that the one thing, and it kind of some lessons learned here in terms of stuff like this, and that I think you said it, Sarah, is I think all the right questions were asked here. I think this was a good place to start, to bring those questions back to the board. But at the end of the day, the board is, what's the objective? What's the goal? Is it revenue? Okay. Is it revenue for what? You know, so.
I know I don't want to be speculative, but my recollection of it was just simply it wouldn't go to any particular program. It would just offset the budget. That was my original recollection of it, but that may be different and it may have changed.
All right, so I think we're good there. So we'll turn to our next agenda item, which is public comment. Michelle.
Good morning. If anyone in person would like to participate, please wait for the chair to acknowledge you. You'll have the 3 minutes to comment. Please state your name and address for the record.
Seems quiet in here today.
We have one.
Oh, we do. Oh, here we go. Please. Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Doug Wilson, and I'm here representing the Blue Wave Booster Club. We are a registered 501c3 nonprofit here in town. We represent all sports teams in Darien High School. And we are Title IX compliant. We were formed in 2006 to raise money for the wants of Darien High School athletic teams, the band, the Spirit Squad, and other student-led organizations. The Board of Education provides for the customary needs of the respective teams. However, many teams have essential and customary wants that exceed their respective budgets. The Booster Club helps bridge the gap between the wants and the needs of these individual teams. To date, since 2006, we've raised over $750,000, and all of that money has flowed back to Darien teams. Our additional mission is to foster sportsmanship, school and community spirit across students, parents, teachers, and staff. To that end, we launched the Team Spirit posters in 2019. The intent of the Team Spirit poster was to promote Darien athletics, the band, and the Spirit Squad by honoring the exemplary student athletes with emphasis on team captains and seniors, promote awareness of the Booster Club, and foster a sense of community. local businesses underwrite the cost of these posters through fundraising efforts that the Booster Club takes on, so that these posters can be distributed free into the community and membership money continues to flow back to the teams. The one thing that I would highlight is in numerous instances, the Booster Club has been involved in raising money, putting that money into restricted accounts for the benefit of certain organizations. It allows local businesses to participate in supporting the local schools while enjoying the benefits of the tax deduction and holding the money in a separate account. Most notably, we supported the senior send-off this last year after the prom, where a significant portion of the graduating class was able to participate in an alcohol and drug-free event that was supervised after graduation. And we saw the majority of the class operate. I think that we're happy to make ourselves available and help the board in any way possible to act as a 501c3 to hold this money. We're happy to work with other organizations in town, such as the Darien Athletic Foundation, who obviously has a history and an experience with the fields and naming rights and raising money from members of the community. And I'm happy to answer any questions anyone has.
Mr. Wilson, thank you so much. And thank you so much for the efforts
Thank you.
you guys put forward for the town. Yes. Come on down.
John Cini, a member of the board. So two things. This policy discussion was a long time coming. I'm really excited it's finally coming to the board. I think we started discussing this in December, and I think we're down the road of finding a way to greatly enhance our existing policy, which I think 6210, if I have my numbers right, is like 2 lines. So I think we're meeting the desires of the community, which came forth, and look forward to, I think we'll probably start discussing this full board level do next board meeting.
Yes.
All right, so that's just awesome. In the spirit of being excited, I got involved in town government around one issue, and they said, we never get it done. We can't do it done. And they put up hurdles everywhere. And although tonight's a holiday game, I'm going to a place that there's high school lights. So let's address this issue as a board in a positive light, in a way that, as Doug said, allows our local community businesses to participate in the spirit of Darien High School, Darien Athletics, Darien extracurriculars. Yes, it might be a revenue offset, but it means so much more to see some of these local businesses. I think the site at Wilton is just awesome. It's like going to the US Open, it's bi-colors, so it's got the Wilton blue and white, tastefully done. And we spend a lot of money on extracurriculars. I think we calculated one of the finance meetings over $1,000 per athlete. So maybe that's not per athlete. Well, that's per athlete, per student. It might be student athlete, it might be more because you have 2 or 3 sport kids. So great questions, but I look forward to addressing it at the board level too. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Cini. Anyone else in public or in the room? Zoom? What do we have?
If anyone on Zoom would like to participate in public comment, please use the raise hand option. There are no raised hands.
All right, so I will look for consensus or a motion, either or, to conclude. 1, 2, and